Marcus Crassus, Rome's richest man, didn't just get wealthy from battles, he made a fortune breeding people. Imagine this: a young girl stands in a villa, her body inspected like livestock, her value written down for the kids she could produce. It's horrifying, but Rome made it normal. What I'm about to share will shatter your view of Rome's greatness. They wrote books and built roads, but they also treated humans like cattle, with precise notes and plans. This dark truth about their world will stick with you. Picture yourself standing in a huge, sunny courtyard of a fancy Roman house, a long time ago. A super rich guy, Marcus Crassus, is looking at a scared 14-year-old girl like she's a cow at a farm market. He checks her teeth to see if she's healthy, measures her hips to guess if she can have lots of babies, and writes in a little leather notebook that she's worth 12,000 coins if she has 8 healthy kids over 20 years. This isn't about animals, it's about people, and it's really creepy. Rome turned this into a normal business, like raising chickens or pigs, but with humans. What I'm going to tell you will totally change how you think about Rome. They built awesome stuff like big roads and cool stories, but they also had a super scary system to breed people, keeping careful notes and making plans like it was no big deal. Every awful detail was written down, and it's hard to believe they thought this was okay. Marcus Crassus didn't become the richest guy in Rome just by fighting wars or owning land. His real money came from treating people like farm animals he could breed and sell. Back in 1987, people digging up old stuff found papers from his house, and they were shocking. These papers were like a farmer's guide, but instead of talking about cows or sheep, they were about enslaved women and their kids. A healthy 16-year-old girl cost 2,000 coins to buy, but Crassus figured she could have 8 to 10 kids, each worth about 1,500 coins when sold. That's 12,000 to 15,000 coins of profit over 20 years, just by making her have babies. It's like doing a math problem about people, and it's really sad. The papers even tracked when women got pregnant, if the babies were born healthy, and if any kids died. If a woman didn't have a baby after a year of trying, they sold her for less money, like she was broken. One note talked about buying a girl from Greece because her old owner said she had really healthy kids. It's gross to think about people being treated like that. The worst part of all this was how they picked people to have babies together. It was like choosing dogs to make puppies with certain traits. Crassus would pick tall, strong guys and pair them with women from places known for having smart or skilled workers. He'd match pretty women with clever men to make slaves who could work in fancy houses, like serving food or cleaning. People who dig up old stuff found parts of Crassus's house where pregnant women lived in special rooms. These rooms weren't nice. They were built to make sure the women stayed healthy enough to have more babies without getting sick. The rooms were big enough for a mom and a couple of kids, but only so they could keep making more slaves, not because anyone cared about them. Scientists who study old bones found that some women, as young as 13 or 14, had babies, and their bodies showed signs of really tough births. Today, those kinds of births would send you to the hospital, but back then, it was just part of the business, and no one thought it was wrong. Rome didn't just do this quietly, they wrote books about it, like how-to guides for breeding people. A guy named Varro wrote one, and it wasn't about farming animals, it was about slaves. His book was like a farmer's manual, but way scarier because it was about humans. He said to buy girls between 12 and 16 years old because they could have the most babies. He thought 15 was the best age for a girl to start having kids, since she could have babies for many years without dying, which would lose money for the owner. The book told owners to give pregnant women extra food, like bread or sometimes meat, but not to be nice, it was to make the babies stronger so they'd sell for more coins. Varro even said to keep the strongest men separate, calling them stallions in the records, and give them better food and beds so they'd make healthier kids. If a woman couldn't have a baby after 2 years, they sold her cheap. If a man's kids were weak, they sent him to dangerous jobs, like working in mines, where he might die, because he wasn't worth keeping around. The creepiest part was how they made people obey. When a young woman arrived at a villa, they started training her to break her spirit so she wouldn't fight back. For 6 months or a year, she was kept in a tiny room all alone, away from everyone else. The only person she saw was an older woman who already followed the rules. They wanted the new girl to feel helpless and depend on them for everything. They taught her to do whatever they said, especially about having babies. They gave her just enough food to survive, like a little bread and water, so she was too weak to argue or run away. If she did what they wanted, she got more food. If she didn't, she went hungry. They took away her real name, her language, and her beliefs, giving her a Roman name and making her speak their language. If she spoke her own language, they punished her, sometimes by hitting her or locking her up. If she came with her own kids, they took them away right away and sent them to another part of the house or sold them to someone else. This made her so sad and scared that she'd do anything to avoid more pain. They even used her kids as a way to control her, saying they'd hurt them if she didn't obey. Let's make this real with a story. Imagine a girl named Lila, who's 13 and just arrived at Crassus's villa from a faraway place. She's scared and doesn't understand what's happening. They lock her in a small, dark room with no windows. An older woman named Maria, who's been there for years, visits her every day. Maria tells Lila she has to follow the rules or she won't get food. They give Lila a new name, Julia, and punish her if she uses her old one. For months, she gets just a tiny bit of bread and water, so she's always hungry and weak. They teach her to obey every order, especially about having babies later. If she talks back, they take her food away or lock her in the room longer. By the time she's 15, Lila's so broken she does whatever they say without thinking. She even starts helping Maria train new girls, because that's the only way she knows how to survive. It's so sad, but that's how they made sure no one would fight back. Over time, the women who survived this training acted like they didn't care about their own kids. They'd feed and clean them, but only because it was their job, not because they felt love. The owners wanted it this way, so the women wouldn't get too attached and would keep having more babies. Some women even helped train new girls, showing them how to obey, because they'd been so broken they didn't know any other way. The Romans called these women premium, because they were the best at following orders and making babies. Now, let's talk about the kids born into this system. These kids, called verni, were born in a villa and never knew what it was like to be free. They were the goal of the whole breeding system, because they grew up thinking being a slave was normal. Imagine a little boy named Max, born in Crassus's villa. He never really knows his mom, because she's sent back to work soon after he's born. Instead, he's raised in a big room with lots of other babies, looked after by older women who teach him to call the villa owner master. By age 5, Max is taken away to learn a job, like carrying heavy stuff or cleaning. If he's really smart, they might teach him to read and write, but only so he can help the owner with things like keeping track of money or slaves. Max grows up believing his only purpose is to serve the owner, never dreaming of a different life. That's why the Romans loved verni. They were super loyal because they didn't know anything else. The Romans planned everything carefully. They made sure lots of women had babies at the same time, usually in spring, so the kids could grow when there was plenty of food. Babies were checked right after birth to see if they were healthy. If a baby looked weak or sick, they might kill it to save money, because they didn't want to waste food or time on a kid who wouldn't be valuable. Healthy babies got a mark, like a tattoo or brand, showing when they were born, who their parents were, and what job they'd do later, like working in the fields or serving in the house. It's like putting a price tag on a person from the moment they're born. As these kids grew up, they were trained for specific jobs. Imagine a girl named Sophie, born in the villa. By age 6, she's learning to sew or cook, but not for fun, it's so she can be a good slave. If she's good at something, like making clothes, they train her more, but they also teach her to think her skills are a gift from the owner, not something she owns herself. For kids meant to have babies later, they started teaching them about it early, in a way that made it seem like their only job was to make more slaves. They didn't want these kids to love their future partners or babies, just to do what they were told. It's so wrong to think about kids being raised like that. The slave markets were another awful part of this. Picture a noisy town square, like a big outdoor fair, but instead of games or food, there are people for sale. They'd put young women and men on platforms, like a stage, so everyone could see them. Buyers would walk up, touch their arms or legs, check their teeth, and even look at private parts to see if they could have healthy kids. For women meant to have babies, it was extra humiliating. Sellers would shout things like, "This one's had 2 healthy kids already," or "Her family makes strong workers." It was like selling a used car, but with people. Women who'd already had healthy kids cost more because they were proven. Men were checked for strength or how many kids they'd made. Sometimes, they'd show a family together to prove the parents made good kids, but then split them up after the sale, which was so sad. Here's another story to show how bad it was. Imagine a young man named Leo, who's tall and strong. At the market, buyers check his muscles and ask how many kids he's had. The seller shows off Leo's 2 healthy sons, saying they're proof he's a good stallion. The crowd cheers, and Leo's sold to a new owner, but his kids are sent somewhere else. Leo never sees them again, and he's forced to keep making babies with whoever his new owner picks. It's heartbreaking to think about families being torn apart like that, just for money. Doctors in Rome had a special job just for this breeding system. They weren't there to make people feel better, they were there to make sure the system worked. A doctor might check a woman every month to see if she was ready to have a baby. They'd write down when she was most likely to get pregnant and tell the owner the best time to pair her with a man. If a woman had a hard time giving birth, the doctor would try to save the baby, even if it meant the mom might not make it. They saw moms as tools, not people. One doctor, Serenus, wrote a whole book about this, like a guide for fixing machines, but it was about women's bodies. He explained how to check if a woman could have babies, what food to give her to make stronger kids, and how to handle tough births. It's so cold and creepy to read now. If a woman was pregnant, they gave her extra food, like bread, vegetables, or sometimes meat, but only to make the baby healthier, not because they cared about her. If a birth went wrong, they might do a dangerous surgery to get the baby out, knowing the mom might die. They didn't care about her life. Babies were worth more. These surgeries were done long before they were safe, and they only did them to save the baby, not the mom. It's hard to imagine how scary that must have been for those women. But some slaves fought back, and the biggest fight was led by a guy named Spartacus. He started as a gladiator, like a fighter in a big show, but he turned into a leader who wanted to stop this whole system. His group didn't just free slaves, they attacked villas and burned the papers and buildings used for breeding. They knew if they could stop the breeding, Rome's whole slave system would fall apart, because they wouldn't have new slaves to keep it going. Imagine Spartacus and his friends breaking into a villa, unlocking the rooms where women were kept, and letting them run free. They smashed the special birthing rooms and burned the record books so no one could restart the system. It was a big, brave move, but it made the Romans super mad. The Romans knew how important these breeding houses were, so their leader, another guy named Crassus, not Marcus, made it his top job to protect them. He sent soldiers to guard the villas over regular farms, because without new slaves, their whole way of life would collapse. When Spartacus's revolt was finally stopped, the Romans were super harsh. They punished the rebels in public, especially women who helped free others, to scare anyone else from trying. They lined up people along a big road and hurt them in front of everyone, showing what happens if you mess with their system. It was a terrible way to keep control. People who dig up old stuff today have found so much proof of this. They've seen rooms in villas built just for pregnant women, with stone beds and special tools for delivering babies. These rooms had heaters, not to keep people warm, but to make sure babies didn't die in the cold. They found bones of women who had babies when they were only 13 or 14, and their bodies show how hard those births were. Some women's bones show they had so many babies, their bodies were worn out, like a machine used too much. There are also big graves with lots of baby bones, showing that many didn't survive long. It was just part of how the system worked, and no one thought it was wrong back then. One place, near a city called Tusculum, had a huge setup for breeding. There were separate rooms for men picked to make babies, a big area for women giving birth, and a nursery that could hold over 100 babies at once. It's like finding a factory, but instead of making toys or clothes, it was making people. The tools they found, like ones for checking women's bodies, weren't used anywhere else in Roman houses, which shows how serious they were about this system. This Roman breeding system wasn't just something that happened and went away. It set up ways to treat people badly that lasted for hundreds of years. When people started colonies in places like America, they used Roman ideas to breed slaves. They even read those old Roman books, like Varro's, to figure out how to do it. They copied how Romans broke people's spirits, took away their names, and split up families to make them easier to control. It's sad to think that something so awful from so long ago kept influencing people to do bad things. Even today, some terrible people who trap others for work or worse use tricks that sound a lot like what the Romans did. They keep people alone, scare them, and take away their names or families to make them obey. It's a pattern that started with Rome and shows up in the worst places now, like with human trafficking. Learning about this helps us spot those tricks and stop them. What Rome did shows how a place can be really smart, building huge cities, writing deep books, but still do horrible things. They wrote about being fair and kind, but then made guides to treat people like animals. It's a reminder that being great doesn't mean much if you're hurting others. Real greatness means treating everyone like they matter, no matter who they are. This history helps us see how important it is to stand up for people and make sure no one is treated like this again. If this creepy story grabbed you, click the next video on your screen to hear another wild piece of history. If you thought this was shocking, hit subscribe so we can keep digging into these hidden stories together. These people's voices deserve to be heard, and we can't let them be forgotten.